All right, thank you, Christopher.
Yes,
Let me
thank
begin
you.
sharing the screen. All right, let me see. Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody. Christopher already introduced us. Both Donette and I teach at Georgetown University in the intensive English program. And at Georgetown, I also serve on the Honor Council. And in that capacity, I investigate cases of alleged academic misconduct. And I also serve on hearing boards to decide whether or not a violation may have occurred. And if it's decided that yes, it did, then I deliberate with the other members of the hearing board on an appropriate sanction. And I have been involved in a number of cases over the past year, so that reaffirmed my interest in how confusing the world of academic integrity could be for students, particularly international students. So Donette and I decided that this might be a useful topic to address. And I don't know why okay, there we go. I'll have Donette continue with the honor pledge.
Yeah, so we decided that we would start with what our institution offers, and that is a big commitment to academic integrity. It aligns with the Jesuit values of Georgetown University, of course, but it's also definitely an ongoing academic value that is promoted at all levels and all campuses. And it's, I'm just going to read through it here. In pursuit of the high ideals and rigorous standards of academic life, I commit myself to respect and to uphold the Georgetown University honor system, and to be honest in every academic endeavor, and to conduct myself honorably as a responsible member of the Georgetown community as we live and work together. So this obviously for a native speaking student, English speaking student, that is pretty clear, or at least to a certain extent. But what does that mean to our international students who actually go on and study in an academic program in the United States? So could you go to the next slide? Today we're going to be in addressing these questions and the importance that Sigrun mentioned that this whole topic should have for our students. We're going to be giving some definitions of these terms. We will examine some scenarios and address these topics that you see listed here and the role that students play in these situations. We'll also take a look at how teachers can inadvertently contribute to the problems that students may experience in terms of academic integrity and following the guidelines of their universities and their courses. And then we will also address how to help students navigate this system.
All right, we'd like to begin by just asking you, what do you think, what is academic integrity? We've decided we would not provide our definition or a definition, but we'd like to find out from you, what do you think is academic integrity? I'm going to stop sharing at this point so that we can see each other and maybe discuss that for a little bit.
And feel free to chime in.
Yeah. Just unmute yourself. What is academic integrity to you? What do you think that means? What does it involve? Go ahead, Christina.
Hi, so I teach academic writing for pre-sessional students and graduate students as well at American University. And the way I approach academic integrity is selecting sources and integrating sources and understanding that it's a process, and it's a process that involves multiple steps, and it's not an easy one. So we spend weeks on following or practicing this ICE method, how you introduce your source, cite your source, explain your source. And so just for students to understand that once you are engaged with the information that you use on that level, chances are you're not going to plagiarize because you're already committed and you know what you're doing there.
Mhm.
And so that's my approach.
So
Okay.
one element of academic conduct would be
Right.
avoiding plagiarism.
Right. What else?
So, and on this level, plagiarism would be, and this is what I tell students, improper paraphrasing, or, sometimes it still happens that people simply forget to use adding quotation marks. And then, so that's not just sort of the technicalities, but that's how I view it.
Mhm. And of course, academic integrity spans whole other behaviors as well, not just avoiding plagiarism. I believe that as we move forward, our scenarios might actually help define that a little bit. Let me come back to our shared screen. And so of course, academic integrity, the other side of the coin is what is academic misconduct, or what is academic dishonesty? And what type of academic misconduct have you observed among your students? Would anybody like to address that? What is academic misconduct or academic dishonesty? Those are two terms that are oftentimes used interchangeably.
Well, and Christina just mentioned one of the biggest ones we all are familiar with. But what else can students find themselves getting into trouble with?
Please feel free to unmute and just chime in.
I encountered this not in the context of teaching English as a second language, but I was adjunct at Georgetown at the time. It was one of those gray areas in which students who were supposed to attend each other's group presentations would not. And it was a gray area.
Mm-hmm.
And one that I didn't want to be in a police state. I asked them. They told me they did. I had evidence they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something I was willing to or thought was wise to escalate to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I was shocked, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That is pretty bad, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
For one thing, it was disrespectful to the other students.
Exactly.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
Disrespectful to me to kind of double down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And lie to you.
On something that I knew not to be true.
It would have been better if they just said, "I'm sorry, I didn't do it. I know I was supposed to," but to actually take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely
Have you
not academic, not good academic conduct. Definitely.
Have you come across any other types of academic misconduct among your students? Not just Una, but anybody else?
Just plain cheating?
Well, let's continue. Donette will show you, we'll review a couple of slides that show the what type of academic misconduct has been observed among undergraduates and graduates.
Yeah, if you look at this bar chart, this bar graph, excuse me, you'll see, and this source is down at the bottom, the Nadelson, you'll see clearly some types of academic misconduct and or academic dishonesty are more common, but you'll see that the accidental plagiarism category is definitely the highest. And it's something that I think is most relevant to teachers like us because we work with students who may not understand this whole concept of plagiarism. And as Christina was talking about earlier, helping them get through that process and learn about it is truly important to us. It's important for all students, but particularly for our population. And then I just mentioned cheating. That's obviously one of the lower ones. And in this day and age, internet papers, buying them off the internet is down too. Right? Can you go to the next?
This is the next one.
Oh, it's the same one.
No, this is the one for graduate students.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't catch. I can't see it on my screen. So that was undergraduates. Now you'll see here, it's slightly different with graduate students, but not a great deal. It's the accidental plagiarism is still the type of misstep that has the highest level of students being actually suspected of it. These don't reflect cases where students were actually quote unquote convicted, but that is higher, as is the submitted others work. And I think we all know that what graduate students are expected to do in terms of writings and publications, that kind of it makes sense that that goes up higher.
So the charts that Donette just showed you show all students, data for all students. This table specifically focuses on the number and percentages of academic integrity violations among international students. One researcher, Beasley, found that international students were around 5 times more likely to be reported for academic integrity violations than would be expected by chance. And here in research by Fess Holmes, just a couple of years ago, in a journal of international students, this table shows that over the course of a period of 5 years, the percentage of academic integrity violations among international students rose from almost 10% to a high of 37%, and overall the total is about 1/5. So that means that overall international students accounted for 1/5 of the university's reported academic integrity violations, and this was at a West Coast public university, probably in the University of California system. So that is could be alarming for us, because international students may be maybe reported more at a greater frequency than native speakers. So with that, let's go to determining what could be some possible reasons for academic misconduct. I think I'll go straight to Donette and have her discuss individual factors.
Yeah, so through our own experience and obviously through the literature, there are several factors that emerge in, again, this is with all students, not just international students, but individual factors can include maturity level, being old enough and experienced enough to know what is and is not possible in these circumstances in terms of academic work and integrity. A big one for our students, unfamiliarity with institutional expectations. Having a low grade point average and feeling pressure and panic even can lead to questionable actions by students. Maybe it's a personality factor that can contribute to their academic misconduct, the missteps they make. And it could be that they're, very competitive and achievement oriented. And they may put a lot of pressure on themselves to do very well. They may have issues with regulating themselves, their own behavior, their own self-control, and they may very well and very likely suffer from struggles with time management.
There are also a variety of contextual factors, and these include the pressure to perform. Oftentimes parents set very unrealistic expectations of students. I have found this with many of our international students, that felt enormous pressure from their parents. Of course, there's also competition for grades, and if professors grade on a curve, then there may be even, so that means if grades are not based on objective rubrics, there may be greater competition, and that might push students to academic misconduct, cheating, plagiarizing, and so on. It could also be the perception of your peers. Oftentimes you cheat to compete. There may be a culture of course, everyone is doing it, so I can do it too. There's a lot of research that has asked students, have you ever cheated in your academic life? And almost all students say yes. That is, when you see other students do it and maybe not get in trouble for it, then the likelihood of you're engaging in this behavior might be greater. Also, the absence of honor codes at schools or colleges could be a reason. So more violations occur at schools without explicit honor codes. And of course, faculty and institutional responses. Some faculty just turn a blind eye, or some faculty don't really know how to react or what they should do. that is in stark contrast to faculty or programs where academic conduct is taken extremely seriously, and even the smallest suspected violation is reported to the university's honor council. All right, with that, we will move to our scenarios, and we will begin with a series of 4 scenarios.
And I wanted to just chime in here. I'm sorry, I had not gotten my chat open, but I did want to thank the people who contributed some more ideas to, what constitutes academic misconduct. And we are definitely going to be addressing a couple of these a bit more specifically. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, I can't see the chat right now because I'm sharing here. All right, let us begin with scenario 1. I will read it for you, and then we would like to invite you for some brief comments on this scenario. So in completing a writing task, a student used mostly her own ideas and words, but she feels unsure about one part of the topic that she wants to write about. So she decides to Google some information. She feels that some of the information that she finds is just what she needs. So she copies only a few sentences from a couple of sources and pastes them into her writing without crediting any of those sources. And then she submits her assignment to her instructor. What are some reactions that you have to this scenario? And I'm not going to stop sharing this where the scenario will be always fresh in your mind, but feel free to unmute and just let us hear some of your comments.
Okay, so I think this is very common among students, or it's maybe the go-to solution maybe.
Yeah.
Using Google, finding something quick and easy rather than taking the time to go to, some databases on the library website, and I think nowadays that we have the libraries have the option, when you find a journal source, you can click on, you could even choose like I want APA style or MLA style,
right?
To copy and paste that. That certainly is a big help.
Yeah.
Wouldn't we have all liked to have that back in the day?
Yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Now, some students may not be, I was just teaching a lower level class, and these students were nowhere near ready to search for locate academic sources and integrate those. So basically, the course expected that students wrote mini essays and short responses based on their own information and based on information that they had read in the textbook. And it always amazes me how students believe, or that students believe, that the instructor will not be able to tell if students have copied something. And of course, if suddenly the wording is so good that you could not have written it better yourself, if you then Google just a couple of words and you find the source, that of course is, then we find that students have, and the student will realize that this is, not, that they've done something that they shouldn't do. So this is clearly a case of intentional, what would be called intentional plagiarism, because the student deliberately looked for information and did not credit sources. Now, whether or not students know that is acceptable or not, of course, depends on, we know that plagiarism standards are very different in different countries, and maybe the students have not been taught explicitly. But for, in our cases, we tell students right from the very beginning in all of our classes, the work must be your own. So if a student does this is, of course, a problem. Right.
Jenny, go ahead.
Hello. I was just going to say, before getting to the level of where students are working with databases, I find that a number of my students, when navigating the internet, when they Google something, they don't actually go into the host site.
No.
So that's an interesting kind of missing step sometimes, is when they're plagiarizing. It's just from what's offered up at the first kind of interface. And
they might even say Google is the source.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just wanted to bring that up. Yeah.
Yes, good point.
Mhm.
And yes, Jane had told everyone, I often tell students, if you can find it, I can find it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right.
In our next scenario, a student is working on a short secondary research paper. Most of the information in this paper is based on sources provided by the professor. The student selects source information to include in his writing, following along what the teacher wants them to do. He then tries hard to paraphrase the information instead of quoting it. Again, what we're trying to help students learn how to do. He has a balance of information that is in his own words and information that is based on one of the sources. So we're headed the right direction here. However, unsure of where he should give credit to the source, he decides to place a lovely parenthetical citation at the end of each paragraph to cover everything in that paragraph. I've used a source in there somewhere, so I'm okay because I put my citation at the end of that paragraph. What do we think here? Have we seen this, by the way? How many times have we seen this happen?
Yes, students always seem to be amazed that an end of paragraph citation does not cover the whole paragraph. In fact, they seem to be surprised that a citation only covers the sentence in which it occurs, and the information to which it refers to in a sentence. I have students ask me many times, well, but now I have 3 sentences in a row that are based on the same source. Do I need to cite the source each time 3 times? And they're surprised when they hear me say, yes, you need to cite the source each time. So this is,
I would say that it happens, it still happens, but it's still a misconduct, and they need to know that it's, they have to rewrite it.
right.
So, I mean,
right.
I personally don't punish students for this. Luckily, we go over many drafts before they actually submit their paper for a grade. But this is when it's like, no, we're still not
Right.
doing it correctly. But if you look at some of the, some YouTube tutorials or some information available online, unfortunately, they often actually end the citation like at the end of the paragraph.
Yes.
And so it is a little bit misleading. So
Oh, yeah.
like you have to be so careful what sort of tutorial websites you give them as examples so that you don't further confuse them with the information.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
and
I
if they
think
go
that's
looking
very
for
important.
that, they're going to find those, unfortunately,
Yeah.
these things that you're pointing out, Christina, and it is very frustrating because, you try to get students to understand just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's accurate and helpful. But we can't control obviously what they see. We can only tell them this is what we're encouraging you to do as best practices in higher education. And I think this is actually this scenario. I think all students go through this. It's like a natural evolution of learning how to give credit to other people's sources.
Right. And I think that's good why, how we can give students feedback in a multi-draft approach. Students shouldn't be punished in their first draft if it's genuine confusion over how to cite the source.
Yeah, I have to tell students this is the safe place to practice all of this so that you don't get in trouble, but we help you figure out what you're going to be expected to know when you leave us.
Scenario 3 is about a student who is writing a summary of a short article, and the task is to paraphrase and not quote the main ideas from the article. The student struggles with paraphrasing because we know paraphrasing is very difficult. Some ideas seem too complex for her, so she copies some phrases and adds them in her summary. She Googles synonyms for words in those phrases that she doesn't know how to paraphrase and replaces some of the words in the original with synonyms. The student thinks that if she does not have more than 5 or 6 words that are the same as in the original text, 5 or 6 words in a row, then that is acceptable. What is our reaction to this?
For example, have you ever had a student tell you, but my teacher taught me that if I don't use more 5 or 6 words, that it's okay? Like another teacher taught them that.
Yeah, this is actually something that I came across, working for the Honor Council, that a student said in high school, he had learned that it's perfectly okay to just substitute synonyms And if you just have 5 or 6 words in a row that are the same as in the original text, then you don't even have to identify them. That's perfectly acceptable.
I wonder where the 5-6 word rule came from, because I go by the 3-word rule.
I have no idea.
3.
I don't know. This is, I had actually, never, I tell my students, even if you copy just 1 word, except for if it's, a key term. For example, we were working on a text on extreme sports. You can keep that term extreme sports, because when you change it to adventure activities, it's just not the same, right? Or cancer, a very dangerous disease, it's just not the same, right? But I've found that students in some high schools apparently are, and this is native speakers, they're not adequately prepared for the expectations of citing sources at the university level, right? Let us move to scenario 4.
All right, so this is one that often stumps students. A student wrote a paper on green marketing in one class. He worked hard on the paper, incorporated citations properly, and received a good grade. A term later, in his next business class, he is assigned a similar writing task. So the student thinks that his previous paper would be a good fit for the current assignment. The professor of the current class is not the same one as in the previous class. This is important to note. The student changes the name of the course and the date on the cover sheet of the paper and submits it. He does not tell his current professor that he wrote that paper in his other class. And I think this is an issue that was mentioned in the chat earlier. Have we encountered this, and what is your reaction to this?
I think that, many of these, or sometimes these mistakes are just based on students don't know,
Yeah.
And I think, many years ago, I hadn't thought about this, and a student who had done, I guess she'd already finished her master's, and she wanted to cite herself. And so I looked it up, and then I found, oh, okay, that is a thing. And so then she was able to use her previous research and knowledge, and by citing herself. And, I learned something, and then she was able to correctly, contribute her previous works to her paper.
Yeah, and of course, researchers do this all the time. Researchers that, are experts in an area, they often, in their review of literature or in their discussion section, they refer back to research that they have conducted, and they refer to themselves in the third person. So that is definitely the way in which you should cite yourself. Now, here in this case, students will say, "But I wrote it. It's my work. It's not like I'm plagiarizing somebody else," right? So let's.
Well, I was going to say, what I tell them to do in this case is to speak to the professor, because what you mentioned is an expected academic behavior by graduate students. You build and you replicate your research, you build on it. So don't expect to turn in the same paper, but maybe expand your research on that topic.
Right, exactly. So let us just recap these 4 scenarios. The first one was an example of intentional or overt plagiarism, where you deliberately copy and you add and you pass it off as your own. The 2 middle scenarios were really about accidental, passive plagiarism. And that, as we've seen in the graphs that Donette talked about earlier, this is the most common form of plagiarism, most common form of academic misconduct. And usually it results from just a lack of knowledge about source documentation. The way that sources are documented in the US is different from what students may be used to. Students may be confused about the rules. They make careless mistakes, not spelling the author's name correctly, not copying the year correctly. Oftentimes it's a lack of time. They intend to go back and change and paraphrase, and then they run out of time because the paper is due. Students may really have genuine citation difficulties and confusion. I see this all the time, even in a final paper of a couple of students that I reviewed yesterday. We're using APA style, and here's a student who dutifully puts quotation marks around a copied sentence, but forgets to add the page numbers. So this is just something that's a source of confusion for students, even for native speakers, and requires practice. Of course, paraphrasing difficulties abound for native as well as non-native speakers. And that contributes to another difficulty. Students don't recognize or don't appropriately, just substituting a synonym is just not enough. We have not found cases of fabricating information or sources with our students, but that is common among, or not common, but it could contribute to misconduct among native speakers and is found. And of course, the last case that we looked at was self-plagiarism, using your own work, which students need to understand they must not do. And of course, if a teacher uses Turnitin, then Turnitin will flag that assignment as having been submitted. If
Or
a
some
teacher
other
does
similar
not use,
program. Yeah.
if teacher does not use Turnitin, then maybe it's not caught, right? All right, we're now shifting to a couple of different scenarios that discuss a different area of academic misconduct.
So an instructor assigns a reading task followed by comprehension and critical thinking questions. 3 classmates, who often study together, decide to come together after reading the text and to discuss the questions on the worksheet. Each student takes notes on answers and ideas that come up during their discussion. At home, each student completes the worksheet on his or her own. However, their answers to the comprehension questions and the ideas raised in response to the original to the critical thinking questions are strikingly similar, which their instructor notices as she is grading the assignment. What is kind of going on in this situation that could be problematic?
So I guess one thing would be, how much of what they discussed and what they wrote are their ideas versus, came out of their discussion and, someone else's ideas.
Yeah, we talked about this quite a bit because, they didn't fill in the worksheet together. That's the key here. Because we would tell students, obviously, if your professor has not given you permission to do this, do not do that worksheet together. But if they're exhibiting, helpful academic behavior by having a study group and talking about the assignment, that's going to enrich their learning. But unfortunately, the outcome might be something like this, where they are maybe accused of helping each other, and so they have to be very careful about how they do this. Is really the message that students need to get.
Yeah, students need to find out from their professor what kind of collaboration is permissible. Is it okay for them to come together and discuss questions? This is really important. Students should not assume that they can just, study together or complete a task together or even talk about a task. It's becoming increasingly an issue. Again, my cases on the Honor Council have made me aware of this, that professors need to identify very clearly what kind of collaboration is allowed, what can students do together and what can they not do together, so that students are really, have clarity about those situations. Oftentimes students might not get caught unless they all have the same wrong answers. This is probably, if they all have correct answers, then, it's not unlikely that many students have the same correct test answers. But it may be a fluke if several students have the same answers incorrect. It could be, of course, an issue of question preparation, but it could also be an issue of impermissible collaboration. All right, scenario 6. This may sound a little complicated because this involves 3 students. So student A has to write a short report for a biology class. She remembers that her friend, student B, took the same class the year before. So student A then asks student B to give her the report that student B had written for the course a year before. However, student A does not turn the report in as her own, but she uses the example of student B just to write her own report. So she follows the model. Then student B thinks that student A might also find another report that he wrote for that class useful. So he sends this other report to student A electronically. Student A has already finished that report, but happens to have another friend, student C, in the class, to whom she sends that second sample report. And then student C is very glad and actually turns in that report as his own, only changing the name and the date. So we have multiple things going on here. 3 students. Well, let us ask you, what do you think is going on here and what is problematic? This is a case of impermissible file sharing. And all 3 students here are in trouble. Student A is in trouble because she asked for the file. She asked a classmate to share a file. Then both student B and A are in trouble for sharing files with somebody else. And student C, of course, is in trouble for receiving a file and using and turning it in as his own report, even though it was unsolicited. So even if a student does not use an example to write, the action is still not permissible, because that student will have an unfair advantage over other students who were not in the position to look at a sample. So the message here is absolutely what students must not do is you must never ask anybody else to share their files with you. And you also must not share any of your files with anybody else. And this is a problem because oftentimes friends ask friends, and students have to learn that they have to say no to friends, and they cannot get friends in trouble.
Well, and I think too, when students are reminded of how, because we both use in our courses, Georgetown subscribes to Turnitin, and through Canvas, that's what we both use with our students for checking, for plagiarism checking. And that whole idea that you never know what is going to trigger a comparison hit and something that's similar in maybe how you wrote your paper based on the one that your friend shared, even though you didn't use that paper, maybe there was something about it that causes you to get caught anyway. So it's just not a good idea.
Okay. All right, I think
that it's also a huge learning curve, not only for students, but also for faculty, because
Yes.
I think often, like I like this, the study group idea, because I always tell my students, domestic students or international students, oh, make sure that you form study groups and then you
Yes.
talk about this and that. So if I don't specifically say, but not for this assignment,
Yes.
then of course they will like, you encouraged us to do it. So what's the problem? Or, when we said earlier about resubmitting the same assignment, I mean, honestly, I present at multiple conferences. I don't completely rewrite. I mean, I have to tailor my slides and my message to the given conference, but I don't do a completely new thing. So then it's actually quite, reasonable for them to think, well, you know what, I have the same question or almost the same question. So why would I come up with, something brand new?
Right.
Yes.
So it's good to have this discussion, but also to have the discussion with faculty as well, that, you have to be that specific in your assignment directions or description.
Absolutely.
And I think in Sigrun's work with the Honor Council, that's one of the biggest problems. And we're going to address that in a moment here. But yeah, professors don't set up their expectations.
Yeah. I suggest, Donette, that we skip this scenario. We'll just go to the discussion of it. So other academic misconduct might also arise from other sanctioned help. So it's perfectly okay for students to go to a university writing center to ask for help with editing and proofreading, and just obtaining some feedback on general structure of a writing assignment. The question here is how much editing is actually ethical for a writing tutor to provide. I worked in our writing center multiple times and was working with students. I had a student who did not like the fact that I did not correct her errors. And when I told her that that's not ethical, she was, very abrupt in her commentary. And so she had expected that I would correct her errors, but you, as a tutor, you can't, because it's not the student's work. I can point out there's a tense error. This idea is unclear. You may have to try a different structure. Another complication comes in through translation apps or apps such as Grammarly. There is a gray area among professors too. Some professors tell students, oh, it's okay to use Grammarly, but it's actually not okay, because again, it's not the student's work. It's okay for students to look up one word, but not type an entire sentence into an app or a translation app to come up with a translated sentence. Actually, both Donette and I have had students who have used Grammarly, and the resulting sentences are just very, very odd. It's clearly not their voice, and the resulting sentences are oftentimes also not really appropriate for the tone of the assignment.
Well, they just stand out, and in a way, as people who work with non-native speakers, it's almost easier for us to catch that. Whereas if a native speaker, a student, actually is really good at using something like Grammarly, they may never be caught.
Right,
And
right.
we were talking about the way it's marketed, the commercials for it. It's like, oh, I found out I was making all these mistakes, and there are Americans, clearly native speakers, that are using this product. Why shouldn't I?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Donette, you want to talk about this?
Oh yeah, and we didn't get into this deeply, and it is another whole category of academic misconduct. But we did want to mention, obviously, there are instances that students, and I think these are pretty international, and you may see less of this problem anyway. That, in other words, unintentional incidents of these types. But cheating on tests and quizzes. Take-home quizzes are always an issue. You have to, promise you're not going to be getting any help, or hopefully the professor designed it in such a way that it's hard to cheat, but yeah, you get the idea on that. Open book tests definitely can create circumstances in which people cheat, even beyond having the book open. And then, of course, there's what we call contract cheating, and that is paying someone to write a paper for you or buying one on the internet. And again, with checkers such as, comparison checkers such as Turnitin, this gets harder to do, but it's still not impossible to do.
Yeah.
And I think our students are very tempted by this. And I think a lot of cases, especially at the graduate level, where people are actually caught, is somebody turns them in and they find out, yes, they did pay someone to help them with their thesis or whatever.
Yeah, and this is actually a whole very dangerous industry that seems to be blossoming. Very,
And I imagine
very
that we were
disconcerting.
talking about the fact that during COVID, when we all went online, this kind of behavior probably increased because we're all online. We don't see the students face to face and that kind of thing.
All right, let us turn to some faculty problems that may inadvertently contribute to academic dishonesty. So what can faculty do to solve these problems? So we have identified 4. I'll talk about 2, then Donette will talk about the other 2. I have found that particularly for native speaking students, faculty tend to over-rely on university academic integrity tutorials. These are maybe these short 30-minute or to an hour-long little modules that students have to complete. And then after that, they complete a multiple choice test. And if they score over 80%, it is assumed you've passed the tutorial. So as a result, I have encountered professors that think, well, they took the academic integrity tutorial, they passed it, they should know, and faculty expect that students should know based on one 30-minute or 60-minute tutorial, all the instances that could possibly get them in trouble. So a solution is, of course, you need to go much farther than what academic integrity tutorials cover. You may need to have repeated tutorials on various aspects of academic misconduct and not just one size fits all. That possibly covers everything. There may need to be more tutorials on how to cite sources properly. And we as instructors can try to advocate for changes in academic programs to make sure that instructors do not just think just because students have taken these tutorials, students should know what they're doing. There are, of course, also very vague course expectations or guidelines for students in professors' syllabi or in professors' assignments. So what's important is that instructors must very explicitly outline their expectations for work in the course syllabus and not just refer students to, oh, here's the Honor Council website, look at this. Or here's OWL Purdue, you can see how to cite sources. Faculty clearly really need to say, what is it that students can and cannot do in terms of using sources, in terms of working together. And they also clearly need to identify and reiterate that with each assignment about what type of collaboration is permitted or not.
Okay, and if you want to move to the next slide.
Yeah, this is the next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I gotta keep my eyes on the screen here. I didn't even see it move. So inadequate design of again assignments and course materials, which is related to unclear expectations. Some solutions to this might be require test prep sheets to be submitted. This one is probably a little bit more work for the professor, but it's a possibility. As a professor, do not reuse test content. Or as an ESL teacher, give time tests so that it's harder for students to cheat or to collaborate illegally. Also, ineffective use of plagiarism detection tools, like we mentioned, Turnitin. Learn how to interpret those similarity reports. I think teachers are a little bit intimidated by those, but I think if you sit down and play with it on your own before you use it with your students, it's really important. And then teach students how to interpret the reports so that they see what you see and they understand why it's so easy to catch plagiarism. And it really is eye-opening, I think, for some of them. And then, of course, you can also find ways to use these tools throughout the writing process. We find, for example, using Turnitin on the first draft is, to me, kind of like a no-brainer. If you have plagiarism, we want to catch it right away. But other professors may not really consider that. So I think any way you can advocate for this, even among your colleagues in the academic arena, that is only going to help our students.
Yeah, I have also found that the little flags that Turnitin shows, the blue, green, yellow, orange, and red flags. For one thing, students oftentimes don't notice them. I've had students, oh, I've never noticed this. And then, of course, if they do notice, they have no idea what it means. More dangerously, they think that a green flag, which captures similarity from 1 to 25%, students assume that a green flag is okay. But if you have 20% plagiarized portions in your paper that are truly turn out to be plagiarism, a green flag is not okay. And both professors and students need to know this.
Very quick, because I know we only have a couple minutes left, but there was a question that was put out. Couldn't it just, do you think it's a good idea to give students plagiarism detection results? And again, I think on the first draft there, I think if we're expecting students to follow these standards, then it's only fair to share with them, this is what we found. A professor in an academic course may not. Maybe they're not allowed to share those results. It depends, I guess. But because I'm using it as a teaching tool, I think it's important to share it.
Yeah, I think there are other similar, not Turnitin, but there are other tools that students can use to generate a similarity report. Of course, not all of those tools have access to the same databases, to the same information. So for example, if it's a paper that was submitted to Georgetown and I submit my paper to a professor at Georgetown, that Turnitin will flag if there's any similarity with the Georgetown paper, but these other services may not catch anything that's been submitted to Georgetown because they're based on totally different databases or different different sources that were input.
All right, so we're gonna quickly rush through this because we're out of time, but this is an important part. And by the way, these slides will be available in the Canvas app page that the WATESOL conference committee has set up for this. So you can get our slides. And obviously, these are some of the things that are really important for helping students navigate the system. And a lot of you have referred to these things that you do with your students. And, you know, I'm not going to go through each of these, but I do want to point out that we have a link here to an article that we wrote about this in TESOL Connections. And we have examples of our teaching materials that we've used there to teach students the progression of citations, like learning how to cite in text and then in sentence and then end of sentence, end of paper kinds of progressive tasks, and all that practice we do with them on what's paraphrasing and what's quoting and when should I quote and when should I paraphrase. And then keeping up and having that practice be continuous is really important, not just once or twice. To emphasize it throughout your course is really important. Anyway, as I said, we'll have a link to these specific teaching materials and more about this. The article we wrote is on citation practices, and that is totally related to this. And that's why we thought it would just be easier to have those linked materials there for you to have at your disposal. If anybody has any final comments or questions for us, we don't have much time. In fact, we don't have any time, but we can squeeze one in. Hold on one second. Before you cut, I'm going to put the link here in the chat as requested. But yeah, and again, that the slides will have the link to that as well. Well, thank you everybody for your contributions and your questions, the feedback that you shared with us that you have experienced with your students. That's all very helpful, and we would love to hear any other questions you might have that we don't have time to answer, or if you have other ideas to share with us, that would be welcomed as well. And we have our contact information on our slides, which will again
very
be
first slide.
Canvas. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
The rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you to our presenters and to everyone for engaging in the conversation here. Just wanted to flag that we have a bit of a break in the schedule now, and then we'll have our keynote address starting at 12:15. Thanks, everyone.
Oh yeah.
Bye-bye. Yes. Hello. Well, now that you have your camera on.
Oh my God.
Lori.
Yeah.
Right?
Also, my hair is gray, so you know.
Well, whose is it?
You had a daughter that played volleyball,